The audio is disturbing, so parental guidance is advised.
911, what's the address of the emergency? My husband's not breathing. He's cold. I just came in our bed, and I turned over, and he's just cold. He's just cold.
So what happened today?
I don't know. He was just fine. We were fine. I don't know. It didn't make sense.
There are murder cases where the evidence is obvious, a weapon, a witness, a confession. And then there are cases like this one. A successful husband dies unexpectedly in his own bedroom. His wife appears heartbroken. She comforts their 3 young sons. She writes a children's book about grief. She goes on television, talking about healing, hope, and the invisible bond between a father and his children. To millions of Americans, she looked like someone trying to rebuild her family's life after an unimaginable tragedy. But behind the scenes, detectives were asking a question that would completely change the story. What if the grieving widow already knew exactly why her husband died? As investigators followed one clue after another, they uncovered a trail that allegedly included hidden financial pressure, a luxury home purchase that became a source of conflict, an earlier incident that prosecutors later described as a failed poisoning attempt, a secret search for powerful drugs, and toxicology results that transformed what first appeared to be a tragic death into a homicide investigation. Then there was the question that no one could ignore. If 𝙏𝙄𝙈 Richins' death wasn't natural, why would his wife place herself in the national spotlight by publishing a children's book inspired by his death? Was it genuine grief, a heartbreaking coincidence, or something far more complicated? This isn't just the story of a murder investigation. It's the story of how dozens of seemingly ordinary events, financial decisions, phone calls, conversations, medical findings, and witness testimony were eventually woven together into one of the most unusual criminal prosecutions in modern Utah history. But to understand why investigators believed 𝙏𝙁 Richins was murdered, we first need to understand the life everyone thought this family was living, the perfect life. 𝙏𝙁 Richins wasn't famous. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't living a dangerous lifestyle. He was a respected contractor in northern Utah. Friends described him as practical, hardworking, and careful with money. Building homes wasn't just his career, it was his reputation. Kouri Richins had a different ambition. She was energetic, outgoing, and increasingly interested in real estate investing. She wanted to build wealth by buying, renovating, and selling properties. On paper, they looked like a modern American success story: a growing business, a beautiful home, 3 young boys, family vacations, holiday photographs, the kind of life many people spend years trying to build. But appearances rarely tell the whole story. Because while 𝙏𝙁 focused on protecting what they had, Kouri was taking bigger financial risks. At first, those risks seemed manageable. Successful property deals created confidence, new opportunities appeared, larger projects followed. But in real estate, success can disappear quickly, and by 2021, the pressure was beginning to grow. Cracks behind closed doors. Prosecutors would later argue that the biggest threat to this marriage wasn't another person, it was money. Real estate investing often depends on timing. Loans have to be repaid, properties have to sell. Interest keeps accumulating whether the market cooperates or not. According to financial records presented in court, Kouri had become involved in multiple expensive projects. Some required significant borrowing, others weren't producing the returns she expected. As the financial pressure increased, the marriage reportedly became more strained. Then something happened that investigators would later describe as one of the first major warning signs. Without fully discussing it with 𝙏𝙁, Kouri purchased a luxury home worth nearly $2 million. According to prosecutors, 𝙏𝙁 was shocked. He believed the purchase exposed the family to enormous financial risk. It wasn't simply an argument over a house. It represented 2 completely different ways of thinking. One spouse wanted to expand. The other wanted to protect what they already had. That disagreement would become an important piece of the prosecution's theory about motive. But Eric wasn't just worried about real estate anymore. According to evidence later presented in court, he had begun making quiet decisions that suggested his concerns were growing. The husband begins preparing. Most people don't announce when they lose trust in someone. Sometimes, the first signs appear only on paper. According to court testimony, Eric quietly met with professionals to update parts of his financial planning. Business interests were moved into trusts. Certain estate arrangements changed. Investigators later alleged that he also took steps to reduce Kouri's control over some of his assets. To the outside world, nothing seemed different. Family life continued. Business continued. Friends saw what appeared to be a normal couple. But prosecutors argued these weren't routine updates. They believed Eric was trying to protect his financial future. The question is, why? Did he simply want better estate planning? Or had something happened inside the marriage that convinced him he needed to prepare for the unexpected? No one knew. At least, not yet. Because just weeks later, something happened on Valentine's Day. An incident that seemed like nothing more than a sudden illness at the time, but would later become one of the most important chapters in the entire investigation. By February 2022, Eric Richins had no reason to believe that Valentine's Day would later become one of the most closely examined dates in a homicide investigation. Like many couples, they spent time together at home. Nothing about that day made the news. No one called the police. No ambulance arrived. No crime scene was established. At least, not then. According to prosecutors, at some point during the day, Kouri prepared food for Eric. After eating, Eric became violently ill. He experienced symptoms so severe that he later spoke to people close to him about what had happened. According to testimony presented at trial, Eric reportedly said he believed he had been poisoned. It's an extraordinary statement, but at the time, it was just a suspicion. He recovered. He didn't file a police report. There was no toxicology test, no medical evidence preserved. Life simply moved forward. Months later, investigators would look back at that single day and ask whether Valentine's Day had been the first attempt. The defense rejected that theory, arguing there was no scientific proof linking the illness to poison. Still, for prosecutors, it became a critical piece of the timeline. Because if Eric's death had been planned, they argued, March wasn't the beginning, it was the second chapter. The secret that wasn't about love, it was about money. While Eric was recovering from that unexplained illness, another problem was growing behind the scenes: money. Not just ordinary financial stress, millions of dollars tied up in real estate projects. Court records and financial testimony painted a picture of increasing pressure. Some projects had stalled, loans still had to be repaid, interest continued to accumulate, contractors expected payment, lenders wanted answers. According to prosecutors, Kouri's finances had reached a dangerous point. Monthly obligations were reportedly enormous. Several properties weren't generating the income she had expected. Every delayed sale made the situation worse. This wasn't simply about wanting more money. According to the prosecution, it was about needing money, fast. But there was another problem. Eric had started limiting her financial control. He wasn't blindly signing documents anymore. He questioned major purchases. He reportedly became more cautious about future investments. If prosecutors were correct, the financial options available to Kouri were becoming smaller every week. Then investigators uncovered another piece of evidence, one that had nothing to do with banks or mortgages. It involved drugs. The search for something stronger. As detectives retraced the weeks before Eric's death, they focused on Kouri's communications. According to prosecutors, she reached out to someone connected through an acquaintance. She wasn't allegedly looking for fentanyl by name. Instead, she reportedly asked for something powerful, something that could relieve pain. Investigators allege that what she ultimately received wasn't prescription medication, but illicit fentanyl. One of the prosecution's key witnesses testified that Kouri purchased the drug before Eric's death. That testimony would become one of the most disputed parts of the entire trial. The prosecution argued it showed preparation. The defense argued it showed something else, an unreliable witness, someone involved in illegal drug activity who had every reason to cooperate with investigators. They urged jurors to ask a simple question: can a murder conviction rest on testimony from someone admitting to criminal conduct? It was a fair question, and it became one of the central battles inside the courtroom. But investigators weren't relying on one witness alone. They were building a much larger picture. Eric's final evening, March 3rd, 2022. By all outward appearances, it was an ordinary evening. According to prosecutors, Kouri wanted to celebrate. She had recently closed a real estate deal. She suggested making one of Eric's favorite drinks, a Moscow Mule. Vodka, ginger beer, lime. Simple, familiar, nothing unusual. Except, prosecutors alleged that this time, the drink contained something Eric could neither see nor taste. If that allegation was true, the evening had already taken a deadly turn before Eric ever went upstairs. No neighbors reported hearing a violent argument. No signs of forced entry were found. No obvious struggle was discovered inside the home. To anyone looking from the outside, it appeared to be a peaceful night. Eric finished his drink. Eventually, he went to bed. Neither investigators nor his family would realize until much later that those were the final hours of his life. A death that didn't make sense. During the early morning hours of March 4th, Kouri called 911. Her husband wasn't breathing. Emergency responders rushed to the home. They attempted life-saving measures, but Kouri Richins could not be revived. He was pronounced dead at just 39 years old. Initially, there were few obvious signs of foul play. No visible injuries, no weapon, no burglary, nothing that immediately pointed to homicide. For a brief moment, this looked like the heartbreaking story of a young father who had died unexpectedly in his sleep. But one routine decision, ordering a full toxicology examination, would change the course of the investigation forever. Because within days, investigators would discover something inside Eric's body that transformed a sudden death into a murder case. When investigators requested a full toxicology analysis, they weren't expecting one result to change the entire direction of the case. Days later, the laboratory report came back. Kouri Richins had died from acute fentanyl poisoning. Not prescription fentanyl. According to investigators, illicit fentanyl. The concentration found in his system was extraordinarily high. Medical experts testified that it was far beyond what would normally be associated with accidental exposure. Eric wasn't known to use fentanyl. He didn't have a prescription. Family members and friends told investigators they had never known him to abuse opioids. That immediately raised a critical question. If Eric never used fentanyl, how did it end up in his body? At that moment, the investigation stopped looking like an unexplained death and started looking like a possible homicide. Detectives start rebuilding Eric's final weeks. Instead of focusing only on the night Eric died, detectives widened the timeline. They reviewed phone records, financial transactions, property documents, medical records, witness interviews, digital communications. Every ordinary detail suddenly mattered. Investigators wanted to know, had anyone noticed changes in Eric? Was he worried? Was he planning something? The answers surprised them. Several witnesses described Eric as increasingly concerned about money. Not because he was irresponsible, but because he believed the family's finances were becoming unstable. According to testimony, he had started questioning major financial decisions. He reportedly wanted tighter control over large purchases, and he had quietly changed parts of his estate plan. None of these actions proved murder, but prosecutors argued they helped explain the growing tension inside the marriage. Following the money. Experienced homicide investigators often ask a simple question: who benefits? Not because money always explains a murder, but because financial evidence can reveal motives that emotions alone cannot. Prosecutors argued that by early 2022, Kouri's financial situation had become increasingly difficult. Court records described expensive real estate investments, large outstanding loans, and mounting obligations. At the same time, Eric was becoming more cautious. According to prosecutors, he had begun limiting Kouri's access to certain financial assets. He reportedly questioned transactions he believed were too risky. He wasn't refusing to support his family, he was trying to protect what they had built. The prosecution argued that these two paths, one moving toward greater financial risk, the other toward greater financial control, were on a collision course. The defense strongly disagreed. They reminded jurors that financial stress is common. Businesses struggle. Marriages face disagreements. Neither, they argued, proves someone committed murder. It was a reminder that motive alone is never enough. The prosecution still had to prove who administered the fentanyl, the witness at the center of the case. One of the prosecution's most important witnesses wasn't a detective or a scientist. It was a person connected to the alleged drug transaction. According to prosecutors, this witness said Kouri reached out looking for powerful pain medication. Instead, the witness testified, she obtained illicit fentanyl. The prosecution argued this explained how Eric encountered a drug he never normally used. But this testimony became one of the most fiercely challenged parts of the trial. Defense attorneys questioned the witness's credibility. They argued the witness had admitted involvement in illegal drug activity. Could such testimony be trusted, or was the witness motivated by self-interest? Jurors had to weigh that carefully, because without credibility, even important testimony can lose its value. The investigation takes an unexpected turn. As investigators continued reviewing evidence, another discovery attracted national attention. Only months after Eric's death, Kouri published a children's book. Its title, Are You With Me? The book tells the story of a child coping with the death of his father. Kouri explained that she wrote it to help her own sons process their grief. She appeared on television. She spoke publicly about healing after loss. Many viewers saw a grieving mother trying to help her children. Investigators, however, were quietly building a criminal case. It's important to understand something here. The book itself was not evidence that she committed murder. It was legal to write it. It was legal to promote it. What made it remarkable was the timing. While the public saw an author sharing a story of grief, detectives were examining whether that grief had been caused by a deliberate act. That contrast became one of the defining images of the case. The pieces begin to fit. Investigators believed they had assembled a timeline that told a coherent story. A marriage under financial strain, a luxury home purchase that deepened conflict, a husband quietly protecting his estate, an unexplained illness on Valentine's Day, an alleged search for illicit fentanyl, a fatal toxicology report, and a wife who publicly became the face of grief while investigators privately questioned her role in her husband's death. Whether that timeline proved guilt would ultimately be decided by a jury. But before that could happen, detectives had one final step. They needed to bring their evidence into a courtroom where every claim would be challenged, every witness cross-examined, and every fact tested under oath. On May 8th, 2023, more than a year after Eric Richins died, the quiet investigation suddenly became national news. Police arrested Kouri Richins at her home in Utah. The charges were serious, aggravated murder. From that moment, the image the public had come to know, the grieving widow, the children's author, was replaced by another, a murder defendant. News cameras followed every court appearance. The story spread across television, newspapers, podcasts, and YouTube. People couldn't stop asking the same question. How could someone write a book about helping children through grief while being accused of causing that grief? But investigators believed the answer wasn't found in the book. It was found in the evidence they had spent more than a year collecting. The case grows even bigger. Most murder cases stop after the homicide charge. This one didn't. As prosecutors continued reviewing financial records, they uncovered additional allegations. According to court filings, Kouri had allegedly forged Eric's signature on financial documents. Prosecutors also alleged she attempted to obtain life insurance benefits using forged paperwork after Eric's death. Those allegations resulted in additional charges, including forgery and insurance fraud. The prosecution argued these weren't unrelated financial crimes. They claimed they were part of the same overall pattern. The defense denied the allegations and challenged the prosecution's interpretation of the evidence. By the time the case reached trial, this was no longer only about how Eric died. It was also about what prosecutors claimed happened before and after his death. Inside the courtroom. The courtroom became a battle between two completely different versions of reality. The prosecution told jurors this wasn't a case built on one dramatic piece of evidence. Instead, it was built like a puzzle. Every witness, every financial document, every phone record, every toxicology report represented another piece. When those pieces were assembled, they argued, the picture became clear. The defense saw something entirely different. They argued prosecutors were asking jurors to connect dots that didn't actually prove murder. No surveillance video showed poison being administered. No eyewitness saw fentanyl placed into Eric's drink. No forensic evidence directly showed Kouri handling fentanyl that night. According to the defense, the prosecution had created a compelling theory. But a theory, they argued, is not the same as proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The evidence the jury heard. Over the following weeks, jurors listened carefully as witness after witness took the stand. Financial experts explained the family's business records. Medical experts described the toxicology findings and the effects of fentanyl. Investigators walked jurors through the timeline of Eric's final weeks. Witnesses testified about the Valentine's Day illness. Others described Eric's concerns about money and the changes he made to his estate planning. The alleged drug supplier testified about providing fentanyl. Defense attorneys challenged that testimony through cross-examination, questioning the witness's credibility and motives. Throughout the trial, both sides agreed on one thing. Kouri Richins died from fentanyl poisoning. The disagreement centered on one crucial question: who was responsible? Closing arguments. By the time both sides delivered their final arguments, the jury had heard weeks of testimony. The prosecution argued that coincidence could no longer explain the evidence. They asked jurors to consider the entire timeline, not isolated events. Financial pressure, estate changes, the Valentine's Day illness, the alleged fentanyl purchase, the fatal toxicology report. According to prosecutors, these weren't unrelated facts. They formed one continuous chain leading to murder. The defense asked jurors to remember something equally important. In the American justice system, the burden of proof belongs entirely to the prosecution, not to the defendant. They argued there were unanswered questions, questions that created reasonable doubt. And if reasonable doubt existed, the law required only one verdict: not guilty. Now, the decision belonged to 12 ordinary citizens, waiting for the verdict. After weeks of testimony, hundreds of exhibits, and countless hours inside the courtroom, the lawyers stopped speaking. The judge finished the instructions. The jury stood, walked out of the courtroom, and closed the door behind them. Everything that investigators had spent more than a year building would now be examined by 12 people with one responsibility: to determine whether the evidence proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Hours later, they returned, and what happened next would permanently change the lives of everyone involved. After hearing from both sides, the judge announced the sentence. For the murder conviction, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Additional prison terms were imposed for the remaining convictions, including attempted aggravated murder, insurance fraud, and forgery. The judge explained that the sentence reflected the seriousness of the crimes the jury had found beyond a reasonable doubt. For Eric's family, the legal process was finally over. For Kouri Richins, the appeals process could still continue, but the trial itself had come to an end. If there's one lesson this case leaves behind, it's that the truth isn't always uncovered by one dramatic clue. Sometimes, it's revealed through patience, careful investigation, and the willingness to follow every piece of evidence, no matter where it leads. Well, this true crime documentary comes to an end. If you want to understand more U.S. criminal cases explained with original 2D animation, like, share, and comment under this video, and subscribe to Motive Disclosed 2D. Until then, be safe.